Zazen. We're not feeling like everything's perfect. So there is that. And then, is there something more we can do to make our Zazen better? And so one thing I want to make a distinction with is that practicing the precepts outside of Zazen affects the quality of our Zazen, right? When we practice the precepts outside of Zazen, that's going to affect the quality of our Zazen. How you live your life affects the quality of your meditation, all right? So you might be sitting perfectly, but not feel like it. And then I would encourage, hey, let's look at how are we actually practicing the precepts? What can we do there to improve? Okay, so on that note, the first point is exercise. I'm gonna say exercise. We're gonna put a parentheses around diet. We'll do that another time. But I want to offer this quote from the godfather of modern fitness, Jack LaLanne. He says, "Diet and exercise are the salvation of America." Woo! Wow, that's a pretty strong statement there. And I would suggest that this particular point of exercise and diet go under the fifth precept of not, traditionally that precept has to do with not abusing drugs or alcohol, but it's really much broader than simply drugs and alcohol. It's about our diet, what we consume, and how we treat our body. Okay, so let me, let's see. Let me go back there. Okay, so I want to share, I'm gonna stop that for a second. I want to share just a little bit my own story with exercise, my teacher's story a little bit. I mean, I'm not going to tell her story for her, but just to share you a little bit about her and her teacher, what I was told anyways. So let me start with myself. I hate exercise. It's not something my chief form of exercise is going swimming. I go into the pool, and I've never enjoyed getting into the pool. It always requires some effort for me to remove my clothing, put on a suit, but the worst part of it is going into a cold pool. It's just not comfortable for me, and I can psych myself up to do it, but I have to continually do that. Now, thanks to the fact that my mother, when I was a little kid, pushing me into keep not giving up. And now while I do enjoy it, it's difficult. It's difficult to just get the momentum going to do it. And I share that because I want to give you an example that you don't have to always like. I mean, if you do the exercise, I like swimming, but you don't always have to like getting into it. And it's often very difficult to get started in some form of exercise. But I swam competitively, and at this time in my life where competition really doesn't even matter, doesn't exist, I know that there's lots of health benefits to regular exercise, whether it's, and for me, it's swimming, it's walking, it's lifting weights now. Those are some of the things that I do. And so this is, again, I'm just sharing my own practice with this. This is my engaging of this precept of taking care of the body, not consuming alcohol. When you exercise regularly, you feel better, right? You might not initially feel better, but there's all kinds of endorphins that I've noticed in my, we call them the neurotransmitters, the endorphins, the dopamine gets generated when we're exercising, and it feels good, right? It's the runner's high. This helps me. This helps me a lot to feel better. And then there's less of a desire to do other things that aren't as healthy, smoking, drinking, etc. And as far as so when I met my teacher, I was very impressed with her because she came from a tradition of classical ballet. She started when she was 13 years old, and she did it right up until she entered the monastery at 30. She was in her mid-30s when she quit dancing. And when I learned that, my respect for her went way up, because at the time when I met her, I was on the swim team, I was competing regularly, and there's a real appreciation for the body, right? Like mindful movement. This is really such a important part of exercise, mindful movement. And she would share about, what is this body? How does it move through space, turn and spin? And as a classical ballet dancer, she was very interested and curious about how her own body worked. And her teacher also, Nododaito Roshi, he was a practitioner of Shorinji Kempo, which is a Japanese form of Kung Fu. Now, he had a taiko drumming group, and those of you who are familiar with taiko, it's a very physical activity. Taiko drumming as part of his temple in Japan. And when I practiced with him in Japan, every morning we would do calisthenics, and then we would run down the mountain. We would chant sutras at different places at the mountain, these little shrines that were set up, and then we'd run back, and then we'd be doing work in the garden. And that was similar to my teacher's experience. She was digging ditches, she was working hard, sweating. So, there's this idea that if you're a monk living in a temple, basically you're going to spend a lot of time meditating. And that cannot be farther from the truth. Well, maybe when you're sitting sesshin for a period of 3 to 5 days, yeah, okay, I'll give that to you. But for the most part, monks are working really hard. It's a very, very physicalized activity. So now this is in contrast to the way that most of us, and I'll show you a clip of an example of this at Sojiji in just a moment. But I just want to emphasize that when a monk who's been training in a temple for a number of months or years, especially in Japan and other temples here in the United States as well, that are training temples, their life is very, very physically, it's surrounded by doing things with their body all of the time. And so when you come to Zazen, after being in a space of being very physical, your Zazen is necessarily going to be different than if, like many of us, coming to Zazen, we may have just gotten out of the car, we may be just turning on a screen. There's nothing wrong with driving, nothing wrong with turning on a screen to do Zazen, but you may be missing an important piece of the practice when you don't see Zazen practice in the fuller context of Zen training. And just to kind of bring home this message of what we ought to, I think, what we ought to be paying attention to particularly in the United States. I'm going to share my screen again here. These are just some statistics I pulled off online. 25% of American adults don't engage in physical activity during leisure time. According to the CDC, only about 53% of adults were meeting the recommended aerobic activity guidelines, and even fewer were meeting both the aerobic and muscle strengthening activity guidelines. So about half of us in the United States are actually getting the activity levels that we need. And it further stated, sedentary behavior such as sitting for extended periods is associated with health risks, right? So if you're sitting Zazen and think that that's going to be healthier for you, think again, especially if you're not doing some kind of physical movement and exercise. A significant portion of the American population has sedentary lifestyles contributing to overall physical inactivity. All right, and then the last point here, the National Physical Activity Plan Alliance reported that a considerable number of children and adolescents in the U.S. did not meet the recommended levels of physical activity. So we are living in a society that is extraordinarily sedentary. Add Zazen on top of that, and you don't necessarily get a good combination, right? So let's look at all of these various benefits to getting good exercise. I can just list these off, but you can read them as well. And I don't think this is new to most of us. Right? Just look at the benefits of exercise. So many good things there. Now, let's bring this back to Buddhism. Like, what does exercise have to do with the Buddha Dharma, with the teachings of the Buddha? Well, certainly during the time of the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, they didn't have to exercise as something separate from their lifestyle because they were already living a very physical life, right? And monks were walking for great distances, and the majority of the population were doing sustaining activities like raising food or hunting and these kinds of things. But exercise was not an issue in 2,500 years ago. But I think if the Buddha lived in our day, modern times in the U.S., he would see that exercise is a means to end suffering, right? That's the first. This is what the Buddha taught. What did the Buddha taught? What did the Buddha teach? There is suffering and there is an end to suffering. All right, what is it that brings us to end suffering? Well, let's look at how we exercise this body. Okay, I want to share this video here now on Sojiji. Let's see here. There we go. And hold on just a sec. Just a moment. All right. There's going to be a little, let's see, I'll skip that. Hopefully you guys can hear this and see it. Let me know if you can't see it. It's just a 3-minute video here. All right, first off, look at this. This monk he's pushing a huge branch, a huge piece of wood against a bancho